Now, if you watch Jesse Ventura's latest TV series, which began December 2009, called Conspiracy Theories, he did an episode on 9/11. He's the former governor of Minnesota, Navy SEAL and wrestler. In the series, you'll see how easy it is to use intimidation to turn whistleblowers off. Just threaten their job, their family, or their life, and they shut up pretty quickly. One such whistleblower, Barry Jennings, died mysteriously in 2008. He claimed he heard explosions happening in Building 7 before it collapsed. You can read his testimony on page 132 of issue 13. Also, something I didn't know until I saw Jesse Ventura's 9/11 program, since you can actually paint super thermite onto the sides of steel girders to make them melt on command, then those who could have been hired to paint it on wouldn't even have known what they were doing.
9/11 is what historians call a war pretext incident which triggered the Bush administration's war on terror. The Bush administration used it to justify their invasion and occupation of both Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as the passage of anti-terror legislation, which has severely curtailed our civil liberties, as we all know. Now, if you were thinking, as some do, that 9/11 may have been used by the Bush administration to trick us into going to war, then you'll be interested to find out that there are, in fact, many other historical precedents for 9/11 in which government covert operations have been used to deceive the public. In other words, 9/11 may not be unique in history of state-sponsored terrorism, because it isn't the first time that such ploys have been used to mobilize public opinion into going to war. Our latest issue of Global Outlook 13, issue 13, outlines 55 such pretexts, or false flag operations, as they are called, that have occurred throughout history. And that number is but the tip of the iceberg. Barry Zwicker is working on chiseling down to find out tons more in a new book that he's hoping to get out in a year or two. What are false flag operations? Well, according to Wikipedia, they are covert operations which are designed to deceive the public in such a way that the operations appear as though they are being carried out by other entities. Where did they get their name? Well, back in the old days, pirate ships would sail up to another ship with a false flag, pretending to be friend rather than foe. At the last minute, the pirates would hoist their black and white skull and bones flag and proceed to attack the bewildered ship, capturing all its bounty before sinking it. Here's a sampling of 10 false flag operations which have changed history. The Mexican-American border incident, 1846. In 1845, U.S. President James Polk offered to purchase New Mexico and California from Mexico. Mexico refused. President Polk was unable to mobilize support for a war against Mexico, and so he sent General Zachary Taylor to provoke an attack from the Mexicans at a disputed border. Allegedly, he was fired upon. Senator John Calhoun and presidential hopeful Abraham Lincoln reported that they couldn't find a particle of evidence that Mexico had made war against the U.S. In fact, that's why they called Abraham Lincoln Spotted Lincoln, because he kept on saying, show me the spot where the American blood was spilt on this border. Despite the controversy, Congress declared war on Mexico in 1846. A year later, the biggest real estate transaction took place in history. The U.S. was victorious and grabbed 1 million square miles of new territory, which included the nation, which enlarged the nation by 1/3, adding New Mexico, California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona, and parts of Wyoming and Colorado to the rest of the United States. Now, how's that for a drop of blood that may not have been spilled? The sinking of the Maine. In 1897, the American big business community was clamoring for war with Spain. Cuba was poised to win its war of independence with Spain. On the pretext of protecting the safety of U.S. citizens in Cuba, the U.S. government dispatched the battleship Maine to Havana Harbor. A huge onboard explosion sank the Maine at anchor in the harbor, killing 266 Americans. Who caused the explosion? We don't know. but US newspapers went berserk. In fact, the headlines read, "Remember the Maine? To hell with Spain." Without a shred of evidence, they asserted that the Spanish, who had no motive for war whatsoever, had sunk the Maine. Congress declared war. Spain was defeated. And the second biggest real estate transaction took place in history. The United States obtained Cuba, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico as a result. The sinking of the Lusitania, 1915. By 1915, Europe had been at war for a year, but the US public didn't want to get involved. One day, in the middle of May, a German sub sank the British passenger liner, the Lusitania, off the coast of Ireland, killing 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. US newspapers helped arouse outrage against Germany. Shortly afterwards, the US declared war on Germany. The sinking, however, had been arranged by, guess who? The British Admiralty, to bring the US into the war. Portrayed as a passenger liner, the Lusitania was in fact fitted with deck guns and carried 6 million rounds of British-bound ammunition, as German spies only too easily learned. And because it was fully loaded, it broke the conventions of the war and therefore was open to being fired upon. Well, she was sent out initially with escorts across the Atlantic, but eventually no escorts at a reduced speed into an area where German U-boats were known to operate. It was a fait accompli. The Reichstag fire in 1933. On the night of February 27th, the German parliament buildings, known as the Reichstag, erupted in flames just 3 days before a general election. Police quickly arrested a feeble-minded Dutch communist bricklayer whom they found cowering naked before the building, or behind the building. Hermann Göring, Hitler's right-hand man, arrived within minutes and declared the fire was set by the communists. This vaulted Hitler and the Nazi party into power. Historians document that the fire was actually set by the Nazis themselves, and the lone communist bricklayer was a patsy. The Gleiwitz attack of 1939. Testimony at the Nuremberg war trials after World War II revealed the Nazis carried out 21 fake terror incidents on the German-Polish border prior to the Nazi invasion of Poland on September the 1st. The most notable incident was at Gleiwitz on the night of August 31st. Members of the German Gestapo dressed themselves up in Polish uniforms and seized the local radio station, and then broadcast an anti-German message in Polish. Meanwhile, a few Polish prisoners, which were held by the Germans, were dressed up in Polish uniforms, killed, and left at the scene. They were presented to the press as proof of a Polish attack. The next day, Germany launched the Blitzkrieg invasion of Poland, initiating World War II. Pearl Harbor, 1941. On Sunday, December the 7th, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, killing 2,460 Americans and crippling the US Pacific Fleet. Days later, the US declared war on Japan, Germany, and Italy. Most historians agree that President Roosevelt used an 8-point plan to provoke and covertly maneuver Japan into attacking the base, thus galvanizing massive public support for the US entry into World War II. Note historians John Toland and more recently Robert Stinnett go one step further and say that politicians in Washington, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt, knew exactly when Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked and let it happen on purpose. That Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew exactly when Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked and let it happen on purpose. It was certainly a surprise attack for the American public, as well as those stationed in Pearl Harbor, but not for those pulling the strings in Washington, D.C.